There are injustices in U.S. history never told in history books.
Sometimes the bad actors and their loved ones would rather dismiss it as troubles of the past.
The afflicted and their descendants hold on to the pain in silence.
100 years ago, July Perry, he had the audacity to organize his community to vote in a presidential election.
July Perry and Mr. Norman knows they were going to vote. And they knew that the whites did not want the blacks to vote.
The KKK warned there would be trouble.
An untold number of blacks were killed on November 2nd, 1920, and the days that followed.
Every home was burned, and when the home was set on fire, if people tried to flee, they were gunned down.
In the 1850s, you really see the first settlement. One of the first settlers to come is J.D. Stark. He comes from elsewhere and settles here in the 1850s. He does bring with him 23 enslaved individuals, and it's prime agricultural land. People are, looking to sort of make their break, and so he actually comes to this area in the land between Lake Stark and Lake Apopka and begins growing citrus.
Ocoee of the early 1900s was bursting economically because of its fertile ground in and around Lake Apopka, meaning that many people were moving here from the Carolinas, Georgia.
How did blacks start earning a living in an area that was controlled by white families that settled here first?
They were working for white employers when it came to agriculture specifically. They just saved, and when they had the opportunity, they started buying property.
And you're looking at black families who were working in the Carolinas, picking cotton. As I was told once by my grandmother, you can make more money picking citrus than you could picking cotton, wherein with cotton, you would probably make 40 cents on 100 pounds. So that's a lot of cotton for 40 cents, so that you could pick oranges by the box, sometime 75 cents a box, 50 cents a box.
Moses Norman and Valentine Hightower, they came from South Carolina looking basically for better work.
Alan Frank's family, the McNeelys, you had the Browns.
And then also Jack and Annie Hameter family. Those are the earliest families that we can tell.
And who was July Perry?
July Perry was a very powerful black man.
July Perry lived here and was a businessman, a prosperous individual who would contract laborers to come into West Orange County to harvest the citrus grove.
Mose Norman was a friend and neighbor of July Perry's, who was also a labor broker. Mose Norman was a little bit more ostentatious about his wealth. He drove a very nice car. He made no apologies about being successful.
In 1920, there was a thriving African American community, almost half of the city of Ocoee based on the census.
What's happening in Florida months leading up to that election day back in 1920?
Leading up to that time, black people were becoming equally or more successful than the whites.
But I would say there's three factors that are really starting to add to this pot. It's like a big boiling cauldron. And what those are start with World War I. Of course, World War I, a lot of young black men go to World War I. And part of the belief was that if we go and we fight for this country, we're proving we're invested. We are here, we're fighting like everybody else. If we come home, maybe there will be better equality.
You had the Republicans courting the black vote.
Black women during this time, they're the organizers. I mean, they are really starting to say, like, we deserve this, and when our men come home, it's about equality. So you've got all of these different things sort of happening in Florida, and what happens is you start to see a rise in white supremacy and Ku Klux Klan activity specifically throughout the state, trying to essentially quash the votership throughout the state.
Who are the characters in or around Ocoee who are trying to rally and encourage blacks to vote in November?
The people who are most often cited are Judge John Chaney and W.R. O'Neill. They are Republican, and they are actively seeking, trying to help black voters get registered. They receive a letter from the KKK stating, you had better stop offering lectures to the black community about exercising their legal right to vote, or else.
July Perry and Mose traveled back and forth to Orlando and coming up with, strategies to get people to vote.
He had black and white folks working for him 100 years ago. He had the audacity to organize his community to vote in a presidential election.
It could change the dynamics of politics, and many blacks would be loyal to the Republican Party because of Abraham Lincoln freeing the slaves.
Take us back to that day, November 2nd, 1920, and just tell us how that day started.
Oh, excitement, especially for those who had paid their poll taxes. This is the big day. We're going to finally be able to vote.
They had a system set up where there would be a screen in downtown Orlando. That screen was used to update people about the election results. In the case of the massacre, it was also used as a call to arms to bring white, able-bodied men in order to assist with what they called the riot.
We know that just days before there had been a large Ku Klux Klan march through Orlando. 200 to 500 people is the estimate, and the sentiment, of course, was, you had better not try to vote if you are black and living in this area.
So initially when Mose Norman goes to vote, there's some dispute about whether he initially brought a gun or brought one later. But he is refused. At that point, he goes to see Judge Chaney, who had assisted him and others in registering to vote.
Judge Chaney was like a savior. He was a man of great standards and stature. I don't think he's been acknowledged enough for his role, his sacrifices. And he says to Mose Norman, you go back over to there, and you're all gonna vote. You're gonna vote today. You're gonna vote. You paid your poll tax. What are they talking about? Go back. He gets into a fight or scuffle, and I think he's struck upside the head, so he's heading out of Dodge now. He goes by and says to July, hey man, I'm out of here, I'm gone.
And then later on, a posse, and then later a larger mob went there. The posse included Clyde Pounds, Sam Salisbury, and at some point, Frank Gordon. Clyde Pounds is someone who a lot of sources say deputized the posse. Former Mayor Lester Dabb's thesis said it was not Clyde Pounds, but instead Frank Gordon who led the posse. It transformed what would have otherwise been a rogue group of angry people into really a government actor.
Locally and in Ocoee, in Orange County, a lot of the local politicians and the law enforcement were members of the KKK.
And what happens at Perry's house?
All hell break loose. Lieutenant Sam Salisbury goes there and with the posse, and they tell him they're looking for Mose Norman. And
what he told his daughter, who was 19, Karifa at the time, he said, look, honey, look at me, honey. It's not time to panic. Listen to me, honey. I am not going to make it. I'm not going to make it. Get your mother and your little brothers, and you get out of here. You go as fast as you can, as far as you can. Because I am not going to make it.
A few men of the state of Ocoee came to my great-grandfather's and my grandmother's home and began a conversation from outside. In that conversation, he pretty much was telling them, I don't know what you're talking about, and no one's in here but me and my family, and I'm not coming out there.
That was a terrible day, my dad said. Well, the news had gotten around that July Perry and Mr. Norman Mose, they were going to vote. And they knew that the whites did not want the blacks to vote. My granddad, and I imagine maybe some of the others, had made a plan. And they knew that if he could get his children and them to Plymouth, they would be safe and welcome.
I remember her telling me that the people came in and they were surrounding the house and how they had to lay low as they started shooting. So she just wanted me to know your grandmother was in this situation and that she was shot.
Caritha is injured. She later shows, I believe it's in an Orlando Sentinel article, where the bullet wound had been in her arm.
She said there was so much gunfire, you could see the tracers of the bullets flying through the house, just one side to another. They were all heading toward, I guess, the back of the house or toward a door. And she said this door had a cat hole in it. And she said it was large enough for people to, of their size to be able to crawl in and crawl out. While on the inside, she was absolutely distraught and she was terrified, And yet, at the same time, she said courage was kicking in at the same time. Necessity, survival.
I get emotional about it because they had to run. And my dad, one of the brothers, was a paraplegic. So my dad had to carry him on his back. They had to go into the swampy area out around Lake Apopka.
So I'm assuming it must have been dusk or evening or toward, night. And she said a beam of light from the moon shined on this field. She knew that it was a sign from God. And they all got on their stomachs and they began to crawl. She said we could see the feet, the boots, the shoes of people from the township that were shooting into the house and shooting their father. She had never seen her father again. And did not know really at that time what had happened.
He manages to escape in the crossfire and hide in a sugarcane patch outside of his home with his arm blown away, and at some point his leg became broken as well. He's either transported to the jail or he is taken directly to be dragged behind a truck to Orlando. Whenever he is taken to Orlando, he's taken outside the home of Judge Cheney, which later became a country club. He is hanged outside of there and his body is riddled with bullets.
He was lynched, not because he was doing anything wrong, because he was doing everything right. Not only for himself, as a father, as an activist, as an uncle, as a law-abiding citizen. None of that mattered.
So you'll see on the death certificate that he died by being hung, but then you see in markedly different handwriting that it was not caused by the racial disturbance. So you have this certified public record that is demonstrably false, and it makes you question the credibility of other public records at the time. And there's kind of an effort to minimize who July Perry was if you look at his death certificate.
What happened to your relatives, the rest of them, after that incident, all those that were living in Ocoee?
None of them tried to stay. None of them. They were leaving that. They didn't want to even, kind of like Caritha said, she didn't even want to hear the name Ocoee.
And those who did not run out of Ocoee and remained in their homes were cremated in the homes because the homes were set afire. But before that, this had been a thriving community with African Americans who lived there, and when they ran, they left behind their dead. And the dead bodies were in the cemetery.
So I've taken all of the individuals listed in the 1920 census, and I'm doing their genealogy forward. What that means is I'm trying to find them. We have found people who've gone to Conway, to Apopka, to a lot of individuals went to Hillsborough County and Tampa area, Fort Lauderdale.
And some members of the mob were killed. That is another question that has yet to be decided. How many people actually died in the Ocoee Massacre? And depending on who you talk with, the number ranges from 3 to 60.
So the initial investigation would have been Walter White's investigation. He was a white passing NAACP secretary. So he went in and was able to blend in with the community and really get the white community to tell him what probably really happened. They were really proud of what happened. They were telling him about how they were taking home body parts as souvenirs. The NAACP then wrote to the Department of Justice pleading with them to investigate. They found that no one's constitutional rights were violated and no one was deprived of the right to vote.
You're talking about the bloodiest day in American political history, and you've had people in Central Florida that really didn't know about it.
Whatever happened to the property that your grandfather had in Ocoee? Do you know?
Coming from Plymouth, we had to come that way. My dad would show us, he'd say, see, all of that? We used to own that. And every time my dad would be talking about that, sometimes we see a little tear, come from his eyes, all that they lost.
It was actually stolen. It's still stolen land to this day. It's still land that belongs to not only July Perry, but other descendants of Ocoee. And that land has blood on it.
July Perry's property ends up in the hands of Bluford Sims. It's conveyed with the condition that it can never again be conveyed to a black person. For example, the Hammonders' land. It has a clause that's saying that it wasn't signed under threat of force.
Were they ever compensated in any way for that property that they had to abandon?
No. There's a lot of no's. Some of the others, I think, got a penny or two. And I do mean when you compare to the value of the land.
My name is Marcy Bodyford, and my mom moved to Ocoee in 1977 when I was in the first grade.
We would just be driving down the street and they would be calling us all kind of and I told them don't say nothing, just ignore them.
I was pulled over in 1981 here in Ocoee, and just everything just is like collapsed inside of me. Everything came back to all the fears we were told, and we weren't told why. We just figured because nobody lived here at that time but white people, that we shouldn't be in Ocoee after sundown.
Bottles were thrown in our windows while we slept.
Beer bottles while we slept at night.
Mm-hmm. And by the grace of God, we never woke up, because if we would have been scared to death.
What did you know about the home or the home that you were going to buy or build in Ocoee at the time?
Everybody was trying to talk me out of, what had happened. I never even heard what happened.
I didn't start hearing about it till a little later in life. I mean, I did hear that there was hangings, but I didn't know the reason for the hangings.
Were you one of the only black students at school besides your siblings?
There was probably three more families that moved over the course of me being from first grade to sixth grade. I also had one of my teachers tell me that, we were the first black students that he ever had, and, he said he learned a lot from us.
But they didn't send their kids to school. They took them to a Apopka school because we already knew it was dangerous.
The street that I grew up on, it was amazing. During that time, we had 3 different cultures of Spanish. We had 2 families from Guyana, so it was just mainly the people that, lived in Ocoee and grew up in Ocoee, that was from Ocoee. that, had a lot of racist, attitudes or whatever. So once they got to know us and know that, okay, we're not bad people, our life began to change for the better. So I felt like we paved the way to make a change in Ocoee so that black people would be more accepted.
1994, actually, we started looking for another place to live. So I'm excited, and I run home, and I say, honey, guess what? I found our house. It's in Ocoee. And she looked at me without batting an eyelash and said, no, we're not. And I was like, maybe you didn't hear me. Same house, $50,000 less, why not?
My grandfather would always alert me about Ocoee. You can't go anywhere near Ocoee. You can't drive by, you certainly can't be there after dark. You just can't go to Ocoee. I really didn't know the reason why until later, but I knew that he told me that black people were not allowed there. So he really put the fear of God in me, you could be hung, you could be killed.
We moved to Ocoee in 1997. The parents and the families, we just tried to figure out how to exist and how to live. We lived in Ocoee, but we didn't necessarily shop in Ocoee or go to schools in Ocoee.
So then once you bought the home, once you were living here, did that change? Did you get any additional reaction from people?
And I mentioned to a couple of friends that I went in Walmart and they were staring. And she said, yeah, you live in Ocoee. And I said, yeah, I live in Ocoee. And she said, that's why they're staring, because you're in Ocoee and you're black. And I thought, no, that's not why they're staring. And so I really brushed that off. And then the next thing was our neighbors moved.
I just thought, wow, this is like a little mini paradise. And then about a week after I got here, I heard JoJo on the radio say, that reminds me of the massacre in Ocoee. And I thought, did she say Ocoee? And so then I went about trying to figure out what she was talking about.
What did you learn about the massacre in school?
Nothing.
Nothing at all?
No. There was no curriculum on the Ocoee massacre at Ocoee Middle or Ocoee High School. I was filling out my FAFSA for financial aid because I had applied for colleges, and I got to the question where it asks, are you a descendant of Rosewood? I didn't know what that was, so I asked my mom, and that's how I saw the Ocoee massacre, from doing a internet search on Rosewood.
I think over the years, there's been a willingness to not talk about what happened because it was just so painful.
Well, it's a community that's emerging, and it has a past that we have to surmount. But before you can surmount your past, you have to acknowledge what it is.
Clyde Pounds was the Orange County Deputy Sheriff back in 1920. He deputized the mob that was led by Sam Salisbury. Clyde Pounds had a son named Edwin Pounds. Edwin Pounds has a daughter named Marilyn Johnson. Marilyn Johnson is the mayor's wife. I feel that the mayor actually has a problem with the Ocoee massacre and everything that happens because it hits too close to home for his family.
In 1969, former Ocoee Mayor Lester Dabbs published a report with an accounting of the massacre that started on November 2, 1920. It was based on interviews with whites who participated. There were disputes about the facts then, and even now, the accounts depend on who's telling the story. Resistance to acknowledge what happened to black families has been strong, deeply rooted in the longtime political and family structures in Ocoee. The current mayor grew up in the city and has never spoken in detail publicly about the massacre or growing up in an all-white Ocoee until now.
I'm the mayor of the city of Ocoee, Florida. Hometown boy. And my mother decided we were moving to Florida to honor my grandmothers. My father at the time was, he was a carpenter, but he was also the assistant superintendent of chain gangs in Ocoee County, which is one of the biggest counties in South Carolina.
There wasn't a lot of diversity.
No, there was no diversity. All of us were Caucasian, but Winter Garden had the black school, so that's what it was in that time. So
I want to go back to 1920 because certainly you have had talks in your home about it because of your wife's family connection to Mr. Clyde Pound. So
never heard a word about him until a little while ago. And Sheriff Moore, he was a deputy, and he told him to go deputize the deputies, and that was it. I never seen him, never heard of him. I know what kind of man Edwin Pounds was. He was one of the most kind-hearted, gentle people that you would ever meet. Using the words racist because his father did that, he was a racist, then his daughter was a racist, being I was married to her, I was a racist. It makes me hurt inside. It hurts me.
And I don't know if it was on purpose that it didn't get out. I heard whisperings of it when I was growing up. I knew something had happened. My parents never talked about it, and I'm sorry it happened, but I think Ocoee has evolved so much more now.
Where do you live at? No, I'm asking because I had his wife tell me the other day he did, so I don't know. I mean, where?
I'm not married. I live in Ocoee.
What's your address? Because I know you don't live here, but that's fine.
Time out, please.
I do live in Ocoee.
Where at?
I'm not going to say it.
If you do, just say it. I'll tell you where I live.
Okay, just because you're comfortable telling people.
No, that's fine.
do you think that connection at all has made it difficult for you sometimes to talk about 1920 because of?
No, not at all. I believe you should talk about it. That's why I went to Montgomery, Alabama. That's why I went to Selma, Alabama. That's why I got on the advisory board to help work on this, to help move it to where we get to where we are today.
You know, there are people who are going to see this and say, I don't believe that he...
I can take you through African Americans' houses, whatever you want to call them, go to their house and introduce you to them. They know me. They know me, who I am and how I am. You got other ones that I have no intentions of wanting to know who I am. They want my job.
What do you remember hearing about what happened on Election Day?
Honestly, truthfully, you never heard that. We were a small town. Nobody ever brought it up. It was never brought up because we didn't have people living here that would question what you did. The whole United States was like that. It wasn't just Ocoee. You might not believe this, but I don't understand how anybody could have that kind of mindset.
When you became mayor, was there a part of you that knew you would have to figure out how to continue bridging the divide that existed in Ocoee?
Yeah, I worried about it, but I thought about it, and I have served for 34 years, and I told you, I've talked to you before, if I didn't do what was right, I wouldn't get elected. When you grow in everything, but you grow with the mindset of people. Things are going to happen. You are going to see what was in the past. You are going to hear new things.
We've talked to quite a few of the descendants, and one thing that remains consistent from all of them is that they want to hear something from you that they haven't heard.
I'm not going to say I apologize to that, if that's what you're coming to. I told you, I didn't do anything. I will say I am sorry for what happened. I don't think it should have ever happened. The city wasn't the one that did it. It was people, not all citizens. I can't apologize for people from Apopka. I can't apologize for people from Winter Garden, Claremont, Orlando.
I'm actually the first African-American city commissioner in the history of the city of Ocoee. By 2001, we were poised to move from Orlando and looking for a place to stay, and we thought of Ocoee as well as Maitland. That's when I started getting bits and pieces of the information about the city, and it's known for its racism, its racist past. And I told my wife, I said, we can't move to Maitland. And she says, why? I says, Ocoee has to change at some point.
From your perspective, what does the past political structure here in the city affect what we know now as Ocoee?
The political structure in Ocoee has been stagnant. So you've had commissioners that have been elected over 20 plus years. But I think the city is changing.
The attitudinal frame of reference that existed in the city at that point in time was that we know what happened, but we're not going to address it. We've got too many residual effects that could grow out of it, because at that point in time there were still relatives of people who had been involved.
Democracy forums formed in early 1997, and the founder of our group, Curtis Michelson, had helped a young man by the name of Otis McCaster get the job here in Ocoee at the radio station. Otis said for 3 consecutive nights that he worked in Ocoee, he was followed by a policeman. So Otis said after the 3rd night, he says, I'm not going back to Ocoee. He said, Ocoee is not a place for a brother. So Curtis Michelson becomes very curious as to why he said Ocoee is not a place for a brother. And that launched the organizing of Democracy Forum.
The city manager was a gentleman named Ellis Shapiro. He's since passed away, but Mr. Shapiro somehow sent a message to me that they were interested in forming a racial reconciliation task force. Essentially what the white people on the task force said to us is that they literally said these words, you need to let sleeping dogs lie, which we were okay until outside agitators came in and started stirring up trouble.
And my work with the Reconciliation Task Force involved finding the grave of July Perry. Now remember what his contributions had been and the role that he played in the city of Ocoee, and he lies in an unmarked pauper's grave. Things that are painful are things that people would many times not want to dwell on. I do know that there are many people who said that it just did not happen. And my question then is, how do you explain the census records?
After becoming a member of the Human Relations Diversity Board, it had not settled in my heart, in my conscience, that an entire population of African Americans had been deprived of their lives, their lands. The mission of the board at that point in time was to be a go-between the community and the city government. The board was superficial. I think that attitude prevailed probably until 2018. We did MLK. We did Black History celebration. And other than that, we had no other outreach into the community.
We have to own up to our past. We have to truly honor our past without any politics being involved. Get rid of the stigmatisms of old Ocoee versus new Ocoee. And I think that once those things start to happen, we'll start to change the stigmatisms of racism that we've dealt with for so long, for 100 years.
Ocoee has a certain old school feel to it. You know, it's a small town. The character of Ocoee to me is like an old Southern woman, I think. It's kind of sweet and I love it.
I see a city that's emerging and thriving. I love the streetscape and the quaint homes, and it's very peaceful, very quiet.
What efforts have you been a part of to try and change the character and perception of Ocoee?
I love country music. I love country music. And there's an event called Founders Day that they were having. I want to attend it. And a lot of my friends were like, no, you don't want to go there. You don't want to do that. I found out that Founders Day was being celebrated on or near the anniversary of the Ocoee Massacre. When I dug more into, the history of the massacre and what happened, I realized that the founders were the ones that perpetrated or helped facilitate the massacre.
What's troublesome about this Founders Day celebration that it occurs during the same time that July Perry was slain.
In moving forward, this community is asking you about celebrating, about acknowledging what happened 100 years ago.
I see an overlap between honoring my ancestors and this Founders Day.
The City Council must veer away from celebrating Founders Day. Founders, which are individuals who not only betrayed our federal government, but fought to uphold an economy based upon slavery based on people because of the color of their skin.
In 26 years, we'd only had it on November the 2nd, two times. So they started this big war because we were having it in November, on November the 2nd. So I moved it last year to October. So I moved it again. Then I changed the name. We're going to call it the Ocoee Music Festival. But that don't make them happy either.
What are some of the landmarks that remind you of the city's past?
There is an area that's enclosed that used to be the Black Cemetery. And that's one of the first interactions that I had with people in Ocoee when a developer wanted to build homes. And we were told, well, this really is not a cemetery because there are no headstones. And then later, the headstones were discovered in someone's garage.
We made steps to try to put a marker there, and I think I just saw something recently. They have a bench there, and it's hard for me to even visit because when we started that process, it was all weeds and trees, and it was just horrible how it was being treated. When you look at the cemetery that was considered for whites at that time, everything was perfect.
Why should we have Bluford Sims, road? He ran an ad in the Sentinel, saying, beautiful land for sale from the Negroes who recently left. Come see me to buy it. Why can't we have a Mose Norman Road? Why can't we have a Vincent Hightower? Why can't we have a Hickey? And why can't we have these people named in our city as opposed to Bluford Sims, who was the one that was selling the land?
It represents somebody who helped cause the people of African descent to leave the community. So no, he shouldn't be revered. You can't erase all history, but you should acknowledge it in the right way.
Why was the July Perry Foundation formed?
To bring honor and awareness to the legacy of July Perry and the Ocoee Massacre. We want to preserve that legacy in a way that was truly honorable of the victims of the Ocoee Massacre.
I think that we need to just talk about it honestly. I had a bill that would provide reparations to the descendants of Ocoee. That was met with some resistance in the legislature. But when you're talking about a situation where land was stolen and violence was inflicted on people, they were run out of their homes, and then land was illegally transferred with the help of government entities, I think you have to talk about repairing people financially.
Walk us through the process of drafting that legislation, getting it to where you got it to.
My intent was to memorialize this event. That's why I had naming opportunities where schools would be named after people that were killed in the massacre, but also there was an education component. I believe not enough people know about July Perry's story.
No, my kids were never taught that, and they both went to Ocoee Middle School and Ocoee High School. And so I think that's important, because just like other things in history, this is something you need to know so you know how to move forward and not step back again and know what had happened.
I felt a great sense of duty to pass this bill. I felt like it was bigger than me.
Can you take us even deeper behind the scenes to some more of those conversations?
I had a conversation with a leader in the Senate who told me that they supported the education portion of this bill, but they would in no uncertain terms financially repair the victims of the Ocoee Massacre. That part was dead on arrival.
Describe the resistance that you faced.
In the House, it did not have any movement at all. But a Holocaust education bill sailed through the House and the Senate. And I think that it just speaks to the priority of the legislature, of us as Americans, and how we view African American history compared to other histories.
One of the things that I did in the last legislative session was to introduce a bill to name a portion of Silver Star Road, the portion that comes through Ocoee. It will now be the Julius July Perry Memorial Highway. It's a beginning and it's an acknowledgement. By no means will make those families whole, because when their ancestors left, they left behind land, just as they left behind the bodies of people in this graveyard that I talk about. And what happened to the land that they would have inherited? And home ownership and land builds generational wealth.
How can you get that back? Like, it was stolen, so how do you get it back? And a building might be standing there, or a house might be there.
I plan to continue to push for reparations. I think it's important, and we've done it before with Rosewood.
I see a city that I still enjoy living in, but there still needs to be some change. The one thing that I wish would happen is that there's so many new people in this community over the 17 years that I wish they had a way to get more involved. And there are ways, but I wish we could let them all know, get involved so that we can make changes. Know that this is what has happened, but what ideas do you have to make this a better community?
Well, I'm hopeful that people will come together. Even now, there are some divisions that I think need to be broken down so that people can come together and be proud of the fact that they live in Ocoee.
Me as a black person, my ancestors, everybody before me, we've been trying to fight and say the same thing a million times. It's time for the people that were the oppressors, that were associated to the oppressors, to make a stand and say, this is gonna stop.
100 years later, Ocoee is healing, largely because of the groundwork laid decades ago. Some of what you heard mirrors the discord we see in our country today. Racism and oppression weren't just a problem in Ocoee, but across the country. The hope is that as we learn more about our history, we do our part to make sure it isn't repeated. We interviewed more than 24 people to tell this story of the Ocoee Massacre. Oral history was critical because documentation is scarce, and what's available is subjective depending on the writer's views. In the Ocoee podcast, you'll hear untold portions of this story and details about how it all came together. You can find it in a special section of our website called Ocoee Massacre.